Namely, in earlier times, it was easier to control 1 million people, literally, than physically to kill 1 million people. Today, it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people. It is easier to kill, to control.
I would like to reduce the number of people on the planet because there's too many of us. It's a planet of finite resources and we're using them up.
First, we've got population. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
The true ruling elite are a cult, pure evil. The elite are extremely wealthy. They have more money than you can think of. So why would they want even more money, even more control? It's because they use their wealth and power to execute their agenda, to live out their evil. If you think this is just conspiracy theory, think again. Look around you. Everything benefits them and not humanity. The globalists have a religion. To the public, it's sold as climate change or the global crisis. What is the basis of the climate change agenda? It's population control. It's depopulation. The elite look at us as parasites that need to be controlled, and there is an unelected network that controls what the public sees. Plausible deniability is their cover. They are playing dumb on every level to gaslight us. The same agendas throughout history are presented differently with the same goals. The elite are becoming restless and are now out in the open with who they really are. Corruption in the government is just the tip of the iceberg. The upper echelon at the top have an anti-human agenda. Threats of world war, but behind the scene, it's more about control and backdoor dealings between world governments. The open border, drug trafficking, human trafficking is covered up and controlled by our own government. It's deeper than that. There is a reason why most of these corruption networks never get shut down. These anti-humanists control mostly everything. You'd be shocked to know what the people in most power positions really think of the general public. The elite's corruption network operates like prison gangs or like a mafia, but on a larger scale. Blackmail, controllers, handlers, money laundering. If you want to stay rich and powerful, you'll have to do their dirty work. They have their hands in everything. A lot of these players simply love the spotlight. Most of the celebrities, politicians, CEOs love the fame and fortune. But the ones at the top of these groups are completely evil. Many become unwillingly controlled by signing on into the club without knowing what they are actually involved with behind the scenes. Most of humanity is asleep and distracted by meaninglessness. The elite are warning us of a cyber attack, also known as a digital event. The economy would collapse if we suffered an internet shutdown. The modern power grid relies on the internet to coordinate power plants. Without it, each country's national grid will become unbalanced, and local outages escalate into a blackout for most of the world. A society slipping into chaos will allow the elite to reset and rebuild a world for themselves. There will be events leading up to a total collapse: domestic attacks, biological attacks, world wars. With each event, more and more control is gained. Time is running out. If society suffers from any of these trigger events, there might be no turning back. Humanity is at the crossroads. This is happening right now. We need to reject the global agenda and know who the world rulers really are and what they are up to. The fight for humanity is happening now.
If I told the world what I know is really going on, they would kill me. It's frightening.
What is going on in the world right now has never happened in the history of the world.
So I've already been warned many times to stay in my lane. So what you and I are doing right now is very dangerous. Watch what you say.
Because it's really about the future.
Before the end of this decade, a new technology will emerge and the future will be shown to us.
Because I think this clear vision of the future is possible. So I want you to pay attention. I don't care where you live in the world, watch the video, because otherwise words will not do it justice. You're going to see what 99.99% of the world's population will never see. I won't talk about conspiracy, but something's fishy about this crisis. Why did they have to shut down the whole world? And I think it's because they're covering up something very, very big. And in September 2019, the shadow banking system collapsed. And that's why the Fed and the Treasury are printing tens of trillions of dollars all over the world. So when Corona appeared, I think it was an excuse to shut down the world economy to cover up what really happened. So in March of 2020 was the biggest crash in world history of the stock market, but nobody knows anything about it because everybody's quarantined at home thinking about coronavirus and social distancing and wearing face masks. So people are missing out on one of the biggest catastrophic cash heists in the history of the world. They don't even know what's happening. Now, the good news is I'm going to make a fortune. This is the best time if you're ready for it. Just know you might be missing one of the biggest opportunities in the history of the world because our governments have really screwed up.
Theory is one thing, reality is another, and it's frightening. I'm okay because I was ready for it. You know, I mean, my wife and I, Kim, were just sitting there having an expensive bottle of wine, toasting each other because we made it. We came through heaven and hell to make it. And it was worth the journey, but to not know if what I was forecasting was going to come true was self-doubt, you know, and we all have self-doubt. So it's time to move on. The prediction you're talking about here is Rich Dad's prophecy. And it was about the crash that would come in 2016. Well, it came 4 years later, 2020. But I didn't foresee, in 1999, I didn't foresee quantitative easing and money printing. I just didn't see how dastardly how the people that control the world are. And then to have it come through via a virus, or what Nassim Taleb calls a black swan, even more dastardly, and then to shut down the whole world's economy and put millions of people out of work and destroy, you know, small business owners, the lifeblood of the world, to save the rich, the really, really rich, is, I think, criminal. It's really the most exciting time. It's also dangerous. Because the moment I started tweeting about the coronavirus, whatever it is, I was told, stay in my lane. Stay in my lane. We'll get you. And that's exactly what Fuller said back in '81. He says, if I told the world what I know is really going on, they would kill me. So what you and I are doing right now is very dangerous for our personal lives, our professions, and all this. So all you listening out there, you know, be a wartime leader. Watch what you say.
You know, we're here about preparing, not predicting. Unfortunately, a lot of people have found out the hard way through shock that they were not prepared when the coronavirus hit, and who could have predicted that? But so now we have an opportunity to hear from an expert on what you see, Brent, coming down the pipe.
Essentially, what I think has happened over the last 10 years, and what I think is going to happen over the next few years, is that the world, you know, after the financial crisis, the central banks just got together and just printed all this liquidity. In 2000, at the end of 2015, beginning of 2016, the U.S. stopped mixing the milkshake, and we started raising interest rates. And the raising of the interest rates from 2016 to 2019, combined with a number of other factors. It's not just interest rates, but interest rates were a big factor. And the fact that our interest rates, while they've come down a lot, are still higher than, you know, Japan and Europe, who have negative rates. That, along with these other factors of having the global reserve currency system, having the dollar payment system, having the largest U.S. military, having the deepest capital markets, all of that stuff acts as a straw which sucks up all the liquidity that the world is printing. Now, there's dollars in the United States and there's dollars outside the United States. The dollars outside the United States are called euro dollars. It's different than euros, so you don't confuse euros and euro dollars. But at the end of the day, whether you like the dollar or whether you hate the dollar, whether you think it's a good currency or a horrible currency.
While I'm reading, that's probably why. In proof of the Northeast Passage, he advances that what the Russians call the frozen sea is only with propriety so called nearest the coast and the mouths of rivers, the fresh water of which easily congeals, but that further out to sea, towards the North Pole, the sea is opened, and is so far from being frozen that, contrary to the common opinion, it is much warmer under the pole than farther from it, and nearer to the continent. This he confirms by a variety of concurrent proofs. Moxon informs us that he had sailed very near the pole, and that it was as warm as at Amsterdam. Goldens, who says he made 30 voyages to the north, says in the 89th degree he found an open sea without ice and as deep as the bay of, I'm going to say Biscay, it's very hard to see. So just stopping there for a minute. The fact that they found an open sea without ice is very, very similar to what is written about in The Smoky God, which, yes, is sold as a fantasy fiction novel, but that a lot of people believe is actually has at least some truth in it, as happens with many books. The mariners of a Dutch vessel in 1675 relate the same. Others affirm that the pitch of the ships melted with the warmth of the air. So at the North Pole, the pitch of the ships melted with the warmth of the air. The accounts of Greenland agree that the northern parts of it are more fertile than the southern, and the former accessible when the latter are not approachable for ice. Krantz, in his late account of Greenland, confirms all these particulars and adds that whole flights of birds make for the North Pole and Greenland for the sake of warmth, when all the northern parts of Europe are covered with ice. So these birds are flying farther north than you would ever expect them to for warmth. And this is something else that there is a footnote about in The Smoky God. There are references to this where sailors notice that there are flocks of birds who are flying farther north to get warmer air, warmer temperatures than you would ever expect them to. And that is because these birds instinctively know that it is warmer at the North Pole. Can't really differentiate what this says here, but it says that the degrees of latitude are not such certain marks of the degrees of cold as the productions of the earth, and that even in the valleys of Norway they cut their corn twice in the space of 3 months. From all these particulars the author concludes there is the greatest probability that by keeping further to the north than any adventurers had yet done, and let me go up here now, an open sea and passage may be found to the west coast of America and the East Indies. And from there, it stops talking about the North Pole. But so what do we learn from this article that was written in 1767?
This past decade, there has been a revival, a resurgence, and a veritable renaissance surrounding the topic of cosmology. Tens of millions of people have done personal experiments, read ancient texts, and found inconsistencies and discrepancies with conventional teachings. By delving deeper into these issues and exposing hidden truths contained therein, a great number of lies and deceptions have also surfaced, causing a polarizing rift in perspective and paradigm. These people who have endeavored to explore outside the box, or more accurately, outside the ball, are now being labeled flat earthers, and called by many a cult. But is this idea of a level plain earth, and people who advocate for it, truly cultish? What actually defines a cult, cult behavior, cult ideology? And does flat earth fit the bill? Merriam-Webster defines cult as, quote, a religion and its body of adherents, regarded as unorthodox, spurious, or falsified, in great devotion to a person, idea, object, movement, or work. Wikipedia furthers the definition, explaining that cults, quote, range in size from local groups with few members to international organizations with millions, and require unwavering devotion to a set of beliefs and practices. Moreover, colloquially speaking, quote, in the English-speaking world, the term cult often carries derogatory connotations. In this sense, it has been considered a subjective term used as an ad hominem attack against groups with differing doctrines or practices. As such, religion scholar Megan Goodwin has defined the term cult, when used by the layperson, as simply being shorthand for a religion I don't like. When considering this connotation, it is no surprise people taught since childhood that heliocentric globe Earth cosmology is the only reasonable, rational possibility, would perceive those who dared consider other alternatives as crazy and cultish. Furthermore, if people exploring different cosmologies found substantial empirical evidence and demonstrable experimental proofs, codified them into books, began meeting together in groups, and started an intellectual movement against the establishment, it is almost inevitable to be attacked and labeled as, quote, a religion they don't like. So if we were only speaking to colloquial connotation, then clearly the concept of flat Earth and the recent rise of flat earthers would seem to many like a cult. But the real definition is the denotation, and when considered closely, it is actually the heliocentric globe Earth cosmology and its apologist adherents who truly display cult-like behavior. For starters, literally every modern-day flat earther began believing the heliocentric globe model, because it is presented by the mainstream media and education system as absolute, undeniable gospel truth. No alternative cosmologies are even considered, and students are told that flat Earth was a false, fringe worldview believed only by our ignorant ancient ancestors. There will even be a wiki fact check under this very video, warning you that, quote, flat Earth is an archaic and scientifically disproven conception of Earth's shape. This is the very kind of one-sided, black-and-white rhetoric found in cults, which stands in stark contrast to the reality of every modern flat earther who had to personally overcome and seek beyond such imposed limitations to realize that viable alternatives do exist and have not been scientifically disproven whatsoever. Much like cult members breaking free from indoctrination, anyone becoming skeptical of the globe has to quietly do their own deep research into alternative concepts, deal with crippling cognitive dissonance, overcome generations of groupthink, handle incredible amounts of attacks, denial, and peer pressure, all for committing the seemingly unforgivable sin of exploring and finding validity in ideas outside the group's sphere of influence, pun intended. In this sense, flat earthers better fit the description of people coming out of a cult, whereas globe Earth proponents are the ones towing the party line, repeating slogans and claims taught since childhood, and punishing ex-members for daring to question the authority of their dogma. When attempting to engage in rational, reasonable discussion, or even when showing empirical, demonstrable evidence against their beliefs, globe earthers almost always resort to sophist tactics like scoffing, sarcasm, insults, and employ a variety of logical fallacies from strawman and ad hominem attacks to circular reasoning and appeals to authority. Very rarely does a globe earther not resort to these reactions, and in my experience, the few who do soon become skeptics themselves. In Zoe Heller's New Yorker article, What Makes a Cult a Cult?, she comments on this phenomenon, stating, the process by which people are eventually freed from their cult delusions rarely seems to be accelerated by the interventions of well-meaning outsiders. Those who embed themselves in a group idea learn very quickly to dismiss the skepticism of others as the foolish cant of the uninitiated. If we accept the premise that our beliefs are rooted in emotional attachments rather than in cool assessments of evidence, there is little reason to imagine that rational debate will break the spell. As Mark Twain stated, it is easier to fool people than to convince them they have been fooled. The globe also has its charismatic, unquestionable cult leaders, like Neil Snake and DeGrasse Tyson, Bill Nye the pseudoscience guy, and Carl Millions and Billions and Trillions Sagan. These and other spokespeople, long before them, have been paraded affront the public for generations, preaching the globe gospel, presenting it as absolute truth, and repeatedly denouncing anyone with alternative beliefs. Luckily, however, their facade of authority and claims of incontestability are now being challenged and overthrown. And as Zoe Heller concludes in her article, the good news is that rational objections to flaws in cult doctrine or to hypocrisies on the part of a cult leader do have a powerful impact, if and when they occur to the cult members themselves. The analytical mind may be quieted by cult think, but it is rarely deadened altogether. Especially if cult life is proving unpleasant, the capacity for critical thought can reassert itself.
Why aren't they pointing straight up if satellites are many miles up in space? I do not understand. Of course you do. Of course, it's very simple. This thing with like the satellite dishes, that's really, you know, something to bear in mind, so you can explain to people. So you're telling me that the moon, with the moon a quarter of a size of the Earth and a sixth of the gravity, it causes the oceans to move up and down twice a day on a ball spinning at 1000 miles per hour, with oceans held in by gravity alone on the curve, right? You should read Vibes of Cosmos. He explains really nicely with the electromagnetic waves and all that stuff, with the tides and everything. The greatest fake photo ever in all of history. I mean, if you're telling me this is real, something bad going on in that mind. I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but none of these are real. I really cried a lot when Santa Claus disappeared from my fantasy. I almost cried at the same level when the Easter Bunny and the globe disappeared as well. If the oceans are curved, why doesn't anyone observe distorted reflections? Really awesome, that thing with the reflections on the Earth. On the globe, spinning in space with curved water, why the need to fly through Canada? England to Texas. So you go from England to Texas, you fly through Canada. That's why when you see the real map, the only one we have, because it's kind of like forbidden to have anything else, so it's the only one left from the 1900s. And maybe now the plane just goes across the ocean, because you can go across the ocean like that, you know, and avoid altogether Canada, because you can do that, because, you know, that's how the map is, the real map as well. So that's why it's so easy to fool people. But anyway, reflections on a flat surface. Which cannot happen on a curve. Do you understand? It's so easy, especially if you live on a coastline, you see the sea all the time. But even if you don't live on a coastline, you live in a city or something, you just like check the city lights and you understand everything. It's so easy once you see certain things. A picture is worth more than 1,000 words. So yeah, they call it sea level for good reason. Sea level.
In Nederland wordt voor zo'n 593...
Even the vocabulary in English and all the other languages, they tell you the truth. Nikola Tesla. Earth is a realm. It is not a planet. It is not an object. Therefore, it has no age. A realm. Earth would be more easily defined as a system environment. That's an enclosed environment. Earth is also a machine. It is a Tesla coil. The sun and moon are powered wirelessly with the electromagnetic field, the ether. Once you read Vibes of Cosmos, you understand this way better. This field also suspends the celestial spheres with electromagnetic levitation. Everything is electromagnetic, and yes, we live on a realm, and it is very possible to have spheres up there when we look. It's very easy. Electromagnetic levitation disproves gravity. Electromagnetic levitation, which is, by the way, it's free, but it's not free for us because, you know, no technology for you and me. Disproves gravity because the only force you need to counter is the electromagnetic force, not gravity. That's the only force you need to counter or to use to your benefit. The stars are attached to the firmament. They're attached. The big question is, what are they? And then they say that Nikola Tesla loved the globe. Ah, man. Some of the people online, you know, online, it's such a sad community online. You find so many sad communities online. Sad. Would this be possible if the Earth was spinning at 1,000 miles per hour? Or 1,600 kilometers per hour? I don't know, you tell me. While orbiting the sun at 67,000 miles per hour. Poor rocks. They should all fall apart, but they don't. These pool balls are spheres. This table must be a sphere too. That is the globe logic. I think you know what I'm saying. So how is it that this guy can see the horizon in his window on a plane at 10 kilometers or 10,000 meters above sea level if the ground beneath him is shaped like a ball? No, it goes down, the curvature. And of course the planes never dip their nose. I wonder why the father of NASA, Werner von Braun, you must spell that correctly, Werner von, because the V in German sounds like an F. So it's Werner von Braun. You know, the guy only lived 65 years. That's really sad. I wonder why the father of NASA would only have this psalm on his headstone. Me too. Speaking about the firmament and all that stuff. I mean, you know, he was from a different time. Yep, nobody cares anymore. If you think this smokestack is spinning with the Earth's 1,000 miles per hour speed, congratulations, you have been successfully indoctrinated. You must go to university and get your diploma. The very first moon landing of Apollo 11. So who took this picture? My question is also as well. So, you know, this comes on the moon. Somebody is filming it, right? Especially back in the 60s. You know, our humanity was so supreme that they lost all the data and all the evidence is destroyed. And now we live in the 21st century in 2023 and have to pay lots of money for electricity. So sad. The sky, lighter than air gases in electricity. This is very awesome, you know. I've spoken about this, and Vibes of Cosmos speaks about this as well. Helium is pinkish orange, neon is reddish orange, hydrogen is reddish, and nitrogen is yellow to blue. That's when you see the colors in the sky at different times of the day. If the sky is with no clouds, you know, especially in summer, you have like clear skies. These gases rise to the top of the enclosed system, what we call a dome, and come in contact with the electromagnetic dome. Electromagnetic, everybody? Everybody. Exodus 24:10, sapphire can be a variety of colors. Everything is science, man. So, you know, that's why sapphire can be a variety of colors. Those are the colors you see in the sky. And
Bespaar in 3 stappen op je zorgverzekering.
He was born in 1831 to an Irish immigrant who had settled in Philadelphia. He was an American congressman, but he was best remembered for authoring a book published in 1882 called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, where he detailed theories concerning the mythical lost continent of Atlantis, which according to Plato was an empire that flourished during the late Pleistocene, or Ice Age, and met its demise through volcanic cataclysm and sea level rise from rapidly melting glaciers, which submerged the island kingdom somewhere in the Atlantic, probably around the Azores archipelago. Donnelly suggested that Atlantis had been destroyed during the same event remembered in the Bible as the Great Flood. He cited research on the ancient Maya civilization, claiming that it shared a common origin of ancient civilizations in Egypt, Europe, and the Americas. He also thought that it had been the original home of an Aryan race whose blue-eyed descendants could be scattered around the world, giving rise to these new empires after re-establishing and disseminating agriculture during the Holocene. While many of Donnelly's theories have been discredited since the 1800s, given the advances in archaeology, geology, and genetics, some of his conclusions regarding the diffusion of race have proven to be intuitively correct, in particular when referencing mythology and biblical history. For example, Ignatius Donnelly wrote, quote, "Did the Aryan race come from Atlantis? The center of the Aryan migrations within the historical period was Armenia. Here too is Mount Ararat, where it is said that the ark rested, another identification with the flood regions, as it represents the usual transfer of the Atlantis legend by an Atlantean people to a high mountain in their new home. Now turn to a map. Suppose the ships of Atlantis to have reached the shores of Syria at the eastern end of the Mediterranean. The Atlantis ships are then but 200 miles distant from Armenia. But these ships need not stop at Syria. They can go by the Dardanelles and the Black Sea, by uninterrupted water communication to the shores of Armenia itself. If we admit, then, that it was from Armenia that Aryans stalked Europe and India, there's no reason why the original population of Armenia should not have been themselves colonists from Atlantis. The Greeks, who are Aryans, traced their descent from the people who were destroyed by the flood, as did other races clearly Aryan. The nations who are comprehended under the common appellation of Indo-European, says Max Mueller, the Hindus, the Persians, the Celts, Germans, Romans, Greeks, and Slavs, do not only share the same words and the same grammar, slightly modified in each country, but they seem to have likewise preserved a mass of popular traditions which had grown up before they left their common home. Their domesticated animals were the same as our own, except for one fowl adopted from America. In the past 10,000 years, we've added one bird to their list of domesticated animals. They raised wheat and wool, and spun and wove as we do. Their metals are ours, even iron they had already discovered. A still further evidence of the civilization of this ancient race is found in the fact that, before the dispersion from their original home, the Aryans had reached such a degree of development that they possessed a regularly organized religion. All this presupposes temples, priests, sacrifices, and an orderly state of society. But above all, it must be remembered that the Greeks, an Aryan race, in their mythological traditions, show the closest relationship to Atlantis. We find in the Eleusinian mysteries, an Atlantean institution, their influence during the whole period of Greek history, down to the coming of Christianity, was extraordinary. And even then, this masonry of pre-Christian days, in which kings and emperors begged to be initiated, was, it is claimed, continued to our own times in our own Freemasons, who trace their descent back to the Dionysiac fraternity which originated in Attica. And just as we have seen the Saturnalian festivities of Italy descending from Atlantean harvest feast, so these Eleusinian mysteries can be traced back to Plato's island. But as the story goes, this all came to a catastrophic end at the close of the Pleistocene. According to Plato, quote, "You remember only one deluge, though there have been many. You and your fellow citizens are descended from the few survivors that remained, but you know nothing about it, because so many succeeding generations left no record in writing. The change in the rising and setting of the sun and other heavenly bodies, how in those times they used to set in the quarter where they now rise, and used to rise where they now set. Of all changes which take place in the heavens, this reversal is the greatest and most complete. There is at that time great destruction of animals in general, and only a small part of the human race survives." According to Rudolf Steiner, quote, "The greatest part of the Atlantean population declined, and from a small portion are descended the so-called Aryans, who comprise present-day civilized humanity." In his 1896 book called The Swastika, the earliest known symbol and its migrations, Thomas Wilson, curator of the Department of Prehistoric Anthropology in the U.S. National Museum, wrote, quote, "An Aryan symbol used by the Aryan peoples before their dispersion through Asia and Europe. This is a fair subject for inquiry, and might serve as an explanation how, as a sacred symbol, the swastika might have been carried to the different people and countries in which we now find it by the splitting up of the Aryan peoples and their migrations and establishment in the various parts of Europe. In a book first published in 1887 called Bailey Britain, History and Genealogy, it says, quote, "The descendants of Shem are believed to be that ancient Aryan race which inhabited Central Asia east of the Caspian Sea and north of the Hindu Kush Mountains, perhaps what is now Turkestan. They are also called Indo-Europeans and Indo-Germanic race." Conflating Germanic, Indo-European, or Aryan people with the offspring of Shem might sound contradictory at first, since Shem, or Sem, is a son of Noah, from where we get the term Semite from. Anthropologically speaking, Semitic is a language group, and while politically distinct, it's still considered part of the same Caucasian demographic, a term that comes from the Caucasus Mountains, where Mount Ararat is located. Noah was said to have 3 sons, Japheth, Shem, and Ham, representing the 3 continents that the descendants of Noah allegedly possessed after the flood. The word possessed implies that Noah's Caucasian offspring diffused agricultural civilization and governed over these 3 regions, which are represented by 3 different colors in this map, illustrating the world as peopled by the descendants of Noah, who was not a Jew, Muslim, or Christian, but ancestor of all 3 stemming from the same Caucasian race. In the Bunting Clover map, drawn by a German pastor in 1581 and published in the Travel Book of Holy Scripture, we see again the world portrayed as a clover leaf divided into 3 by color, representing the 3 offspring of Noah, with Jerusalem in the center of the map surrounded by the 3 continents. The fact that Jerusalem is the focal point in the center speaks to its strategic location, giving access to Europe, Africa, and Asia, which was not only exploited by the ancient Caucasians or Aryans of the Holocene, but according to this map, illustrating the genetic marker of haplogroup X, which is primarily seen in demographics that share genetic affinities with Caucasians during antediluvian times when Atlantis allegedly existed, is most pronounced in the territory that was once known as Phoenicia and today is called Israel, where Jerusalem is located, as well as Anatolia or Turkey, where Mount Ararat is located in the Caucasus Mountains. In this context, Zionism and the symbolic rebuilding of the Third Temple in Jerusalem represents the re-establishment of an ancient colony that once ruled over the world, governed by a Caucasian population that seems to be in a state of collective amnesia about its fabled Atlantean Aryan origins. Of course, 9 out of 10 Zionists today are not Jewish, and a millennia ago, the attempt to reconquer Jerusalem during the Crusades was initiated by the Knights Templar, who were outwardly a military order of the Catholic faith. That said, the Templars held esoteric beliefs that they descended from the temple priests of Jerusalem, and their ancestors entered Europe as waves of lost tribes after the sacking of the temple for which they are named after. Rex Deus, which means God Kings in Latin, are a group of European aristocratic families that claim ancestry from the bloodlines of the priests of Jerusalem.
Rex Deus are a bloodline that trace their origins back to the 24 high priests of the Temple of Jerusalem, which includes the family of Jesus. And according to Holy Mother the Church, and who are we to doubt their word, Jesus was single and had no children. But in actual fact, like all Jews of his time, he was obliged by Jewish custom and tradition to marry and procreate. He was doubly empowered to do this because he was also a rabbi, and the heir to the throne of the line of David. So he had to produce an heir. And one of the most closely guarded secrets in European history is the fact that he founded a bloodline known as the Desposini, which are still extant in Europe today. When I go to England, I stay with one member of it, and when I go to Nice, I have breakfast with another. And descendants of Jesus are all around you, and many of the people who are true descendants of Jesus of Nazareth don't even know it. And I've just used a term which is inaccurate, Jesus of Nazareth. The problem is that Nazareth didn't exist at the time of Jesus. He was Jesus the Nazarene. He was a member of an esoteric cult attached to the Essene order, an initiatory form of spirituality which is still being practiced in secret today. And the Rex Deus families outwardly practice the religion of their place and time, but secretly amongst themselves follow their own path. They traced the influence of these families on the development of European culture, and that influence was quite profound, particularly in spiritual matters. They were the families responsible for the founding of the military order of the Knights Templar, and after that was suppressed several centuries later, they played a seminal role in the foundation of the worldwide fraternity of Freemasonry, which is still running and still extant today. So their influence is all-pervasive. They were still practicing a form of initiatory Judaism which traced its roots back long before the time of Jesus, and its original origins come from Egypt. That story deserves to be told, and it's a story which is riveting, because these people acquired power in Europe very, very early on at the time of Charlemagne and are still in positions of power today. And there is a chivalric order which is still running, called the Order of the Fleur de Lis. Membership is by invitation, but to hold office within that order you have to be a member of one of the families of the Rex Deus group. And they cover some very, very powerful people. What their agenda is today, I haven't the faintest idea. But they're still about, and they're still exerting massive influence behind the scenes, all very quietly. And I, for one, would love to know what their agenda is.
Winning is tough. When humanity was closer to the truth. Dave Garraway, Admiral Richard E. Byrd, discusses his polar exploration of the Antarctic in front of the azimuthal equidistant map of the flat Earth. The one from the 1900s, I've shown you before. There is no Antarctica on this map. Antarctica came afterwards. So you see, even in 1955, 10 years after the Supreme Second World War, which is not what you've been told, they still have, they should have put a globe. Why the Supreme NBC News and the Supreme Richard Admiral Byrd, they don't have a globe behind them? Well, precisely because of the same reason why you go to the UN, the United Nations today, and you don't see a globe. You see the same azimuthal equidistant map. People insult that map quite a lot, you know. This reflection is only possible on a flat surface. You understand the reality of the real world. Look at that, so beautiful. Flat surface. You can call it level if you want. Yeah, you can pause this. I'm not even going to read it because, you know, but I find it interesting to have it there. So yeah, how to know if you have been secretly brainwashed and successfully indoctrinated. If you don't find it odd that a child on a merry-go-round spinning, you know, these things in the parks that could actually kill you. I don't even know why they allowed these things in the park. But anyway, spinning at 7 kilometers per hour must cling that child on for dear life, because the spin, you know, until the ride stops, so they can climb down and regain their composure on a planet that spins at 1600 kilometers per hour. Then I'd say you have your answer. Do you understand? Does it make sense? Spinning. Oh man. You know, spinning is very important. Spinning. People always give this example about being in a car and a train. Dude, go into a car that always spins. A car that always spins. A train that always goes in circular motion. And you're gonna see how you feel the motion. You know, but not even that. Even that is so difficult for people. They say, oh, when you're in a train going in a straight line. No, the Earth doesn't go in a straight line. The Earth goes in a massive spin across the universe in many different lines and circular motions. But hey, So because when something is true and correct, it must be hammered into the brains of kids. You have to hammer it. By the way, the globes, when you buy them, it says only for decorative purposes, not for education purposes. Remember, not for the globe producers, the companies who produce the globe, they say not for education, only for decoration. Why would you need that in school then if it's only for decoration? So NASA budget for 2016, 19.3 billion, not million, billion with a capital B from, I don't know, from Bravo. So what from Bill Gates? For what do we get? Cartoons. I wish I had that money. Oh man, if I had that money, I would do you guys so many gifts. I honestly, I would just pick the best, like the coolest subscribers and all that stuff, and the people who actually care about me, and I would just like make them gifts like that, because when you have that much money, you want to make gifts to people and make people happy. So sunset on a globe with the sun 93 million miles away, sunset on a flat earth or a level earth with the sun inside the atmosphere here, moved by the electromagnetic field. And of course it's Vibes of Cosmos explains a lot better these things. I think you understand. So do you know how the Earth's non-vacuum meets the vacuum of space? And the supreme guys, they don't either. And they're actually telling you. And the Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles per hour as we speak, and as the balloons float around and go up, because they're not affected by the spinning super speed. Flat Earth map found in iRobot. In the movie, you see that, and you have to zoom, and you see the azimuthal equidistant, and then the frozen ocean, and all that stuff. That's so epic. So, it is forbidden to say the N word. There's actually 2 N words, but this is one of them. So 19 were convicted in the Nuremberg trials. This is history. The rest created NASA, the CIA, and the Federal Republic of Germany. And I'm not even going to Germany because there are certain things about the war that you're not supposed to say. So yeah, but how did they stay upside down on a spinning ball? A Freemason invented an imaginary force called gravity, and that's the end of the story. You have to love gravity. And notice the differences. Official images. Do you see the difference? Of course you do. And again, remember, people don't usually speak about satellite dishes. They should. I hope you enjoyed. This takes you to the next level.